needs to have kind of what's the focus, what's the theme, and we tried to let these two operative terms guided this research. One was the trajectory, where things are going, so that we can actually make some predictive adjustments to ourselves and how we can go in the future, but also then understand what's the health of an initiative. It's one thing to be growing or to be expanding, and it's another thing to be growing in a healthy way. So we're interested in that. So we're going to hit on these two highlights. The first thing that I'm going to mention is on the trajectory. When we first did our first survey in 2020, there were 73 known teams who were using a media movements approach. And what media movements approach operates from the principle that 2.5% of any population is open to religious change at any time. And media is probably the best tool to identify who those people who are open for religious change, particularly in closed countries. And so then in 2021, we had 128 that were known identified teams. Roughly, it's about a 50% growth for that particular year. We did not do a survey in 2022, but this year we felt there was around 260 teams. Now, how we came up with that number was that it was actually getting to be more and more difficult to understand who is actually the teams. Became less able to be known as the coalition expanded out. But we are using a software called Disciple Tools, and right now I think there is around 800 Disciple Tool users. But we didn't know that maybe some people are using Disciple Tools as a very creative sort of way. So we didn't know which ones are really using it for Media Movements Initiative. So we knew that there's a plugin that you put on Disciple Tools for using Facebook accounts. And those were the 260. So that means we know that there are 260 Disciple Tools users who are using Facebook accounts. But there could be more teams that are using it, but not using a Facebook plugin. We also know from the survey that only about 55% of the teams are using Disciple Tools. There are many people who are using other software to include Excel sheets, the back of envelopes, different types of software. So we know when we put down 260, that number is extremely conservative. So we find that year-to-year growth has actually been almost very rapidly increasing. And we are in the report, I'm noting there what some of the gains are from teams that were using the Media Movements Initiative in a closed country. One of the things that we identified from this is that we're quickly becoming non-expatriate. And what we found out in the middle of the survey was that there were many internationals who were using that were trying to do a survey for us, but they did not speak English as their first language. So it became more and more of a challenge. So self-identification in 2021 was around 78%, and now that dropped down to around 65% as expatriate. And then the national increased as well as not sure. And the reason for this is because when you have near culture people, what do they classify themselves? We're able to know if I fly across the pond, go from America to a foreign country, or go from Germany to another country, that I am an expatriate. But when I'm coming from one part of Indonesia to go to another part of Indonesia, am I considered to be a national or an expatriate? I mean, it gets to be confusing. So it gets to be a construct that doesn't apply really, really well. We also knew that as we were doing the survey that in 2021, 78% of people noted that English was their first language. And then in 2023, that dropped to 68%. But as I mentioned earlier, that there are many people who wanted to take the survey, but the survey was only in English. So we realized that there was probably a larger non-English speaking population that was not considered to be part of our population just because they just couldn't do the survey. So we'll talk about a little bit about recommendations. So we're quickly becoming non-Western, non-English first as their language. And interesting enough, when we asked people what was their first language, they would note that English was probably the second, the third, and some people was the fourth language that they knew. So that's really quite fun, that we're becoming a non-expatriate, non-English speaking population coalition. When we did our survey in 2021, we were asking people what was the output of their ministry, outcome of ministry. And so we were moderate in 2021, just looking at the moderate, the 3, 4, and 5 level. If you noticed in 1, it was not much of an impact, and none in 2s, about 15%. But then suddenly in 2023, you notice over in a significant level, it super increased to probably 35 to 38% of the people were showing greater impacts to their ministry structure. And that's quite encouraging, because we had hoped that using media to identify people open religious change would give a greater opportunity to people to do expansion or do ministry impact. And we're seeing that they actually play itself out in very significant ways. How does that measure? What does that mean to have an impact? I mean, we can say you feel good. Is there any way that you can quantify feeling good? And well, we did this by asking specific questions about what that impact looked like. Engaging online, that's expected to be a slight increase, but look at the increase in face-to-face from 2021 to 2023. It was roughly 15% or 14% in 2021. Now it's jumped up to over 55% of people who are now identified, and now they're meeting with them offline, face-to-face, to start a fellowship. Professions of faith jumped up again from around 10% or 8% to now up higher at about 45%. And then baptisms. And what we're feeling is that we look at this over this 2-year period of time, we're going to start to see higher numbers of initiating fellowships, reproduction, multiplication, and starting churches will occur in the next phase, in the 2023, 2024, 2025 periods of time. So that's really our whole goal, is media to movements, is to actually use media to identify people and lead toward church planting movements. So we're starting to see greater numbers of people moving across that progression of face-to-face, professions of faith, and baptisms, moving into reproduction as disciples, as you identify converts to move to disciples, and then disciples who make disciples. Then we want to look at, it's one thing to have growth, hockey stick growth, numbers of teams. What's the health? Well, the first thing we wanted to see was team implementation. If you are doing a one-off, one person on your team is actually doing this media thing, but it's not making an impact on the overall media, overall team structure, that's a problem. So what we found in 2021 is that only 10% of the teams were fully implemented. And now it's actually closer to 22, 24%. But looking at the 4 level, which is still pretty important, but it's not fully integrated. That means teams are still working out problems and details. It jumped from a 20% to about 30, 35%. So taking overall, looking at the, and then moving from the middle range in 2021, it was around 30%. Now it's dropped down to 25, which means more and more teams are moving toward implementing and fully implementing in their team structures. So putting those two numbers, the full number 4 and 5 level, you're talking about close to 55% of the teams, these 260 teams, or maybe probably close to 500 teams, are being fully engaged implementing on the team structure. So that's encouraging as a health. Teams are fully engaging. Well, the other thing is, it's one thing we want to see exactly, are people identifying persons of peace? And so into 2023, this is the new question we added, was how many persons of peace are people identified per year? And only 19% are not seeing any persons of peace yet. And then 44% are seeing 1 to 9. As we looked in a little more into the data, those that are seeing 0 to 10 per year, which is still 1 person apiece per month, is These are teams that are within 2 years of implementing their media movement strategy. And again, looking at the earlier slide, what we're seeing is that after 2 years, people are starting to move from POPs to moving to actual starting fellowships and see more growth. And if you look at the 10 to 50 range, 20%, 21%, which is basically 2 to 3 persons apiece per month. To go back to qualitative, which basically people are saying this is their testimonies. They said before they implemented a media movement strategy, they actually saw hardly anybody coming to faith over a period of time. Now they're seeing 1 per month, sometimes 2 per month, and 3 per month. Then if you get down to a higher range or some of the more mature teams, some of them are seeing 50 to 500 per, 50 to 500 per year. And then a few of them are over 500 per year. There's a team that I'm working with in Southeast Asia and also one in South Asia that are seeing, several people coming to faith and several people starting fellowships per day, per month. So it's very encouraging that some of the more mature teams are actually moving toward movement level. And we have 2 locations that are approaching that movement level. And I can go into more conversation about that and some people who ask about what that means. So it's encouraging. The health is there. The persons apiece are being identified and they're actually reproducing into the lives of their population. Reported POPs. One of the things it's interesting is that we were thinking that the classic definition of a POP is something that comes from David Watson, which is people who open up their community, they invite their community in to being part of fellowships. Those people who are actually in the 0 range, they actually had their own. We let people freely identify what they mean when they say a POP. Not trying to pigeonhole them into a classic Watson definition, but letting them say, what do you mean when you say a POP? The earlier the earlier teams that are within the first 2 years of launching have a very interesting set of definitions, from seeker to sharing to seeking and sharing. But as people start to have greater flow of information, the greater flow of people who are open religious change, POPs start shifting to someone who's just seekers. And it's very interesting how various countries, various locations take that seeker and then they actually meet with them, see them, share the gospel with them. And then that seeker, once they become a full-on believer, they actually start opening their community. So it's kind of a 2-step process. We thought it was going to be a 1-step process. Through media, someone opens up a community and they actually start a discovery Bible study. That's not proving it to be what's really happening on the ground. Another way that you can start to determine health is funding, oddly enough, because as people start to see more and more people coming to faith, there are going to be greater funding needs, more need for ads, more need for staff to be working in their follow-up teams, their digital responders. And so what we're seeing is around 60% are teams that are in the early stages, as we kind of mirroring what was happening, was noted above. These are around 0 to 14, or which is basically about $15,000 per year. Not a lot of money for the amount of POPs that they're identifying, that, the 1 per month range. Then when they start to get more growth occurring, the funding needs will start to increase to the $25,000 a year. And then some of them are up to around $50,000 per year. So the funding needs, which basically means once I start getting a little bit of funding, the reproduction occurs. So let me move next to the next strategy, which is oversight. So funding is one side, and people doing team integration, as we mentioned earlier. who's giving oversight to the funding. And around 50% of the people are saying their team is giving the oversight, and those are the ones that are really going back again. 60% of the teams are using under $15,000 a year. So a team is generating their own funds coming from their churches, from their fellowships, from the team's contribution. But then suddenly, as the work matures, they need greater oversight, which is a healthy thing. First is the team and an outside entity. Generally, it's their organization or their area leadership, whatever the infrastructure for their zones are, around 22%. And then when you get to be an entity other than their team, which means they've moved toward possibly moving to develop a board, and then 10% are an actual they have their own registered charity. As I mentioned earlier, the ones in Southeast Asia and South Asia, they have their own 501c3 or registered charity, and it has a board which are giving oversights of both the funds and the strategy. And that's a healthy thing to have the team itself responding to what their work is doing. They setting their own goals and objectives, and they're being accountable. And that actually keeps it from having mission drift. You don't start adding this thing to another approach. So that's encouraging that boards are being developed, the boards are functioning in a healthy way, funds are being managed, and POPs are maintaining according to the mission objectives. Another way to measure the health is people praying. It's one thing to put together a strategy, and you are working this strategy. You're being technical, and you got Facebooks, and you've got computers, and you've got people doing workflows. But our work is spiritual work, and so this is measuring that people are maintaining good, healthy prayer strategies. There's growth that can occur. For example, in the first area 1 and area 2, those teams are generally teams that are in early stages of launching. And then as 3, they have about 40% of people are middle range. But then the maturity of the work occurs, the maturity of the prayer occurs, so that we are staying on focus, that we are only branches of a vine and are looking to God to say, give us people, give us heart, give us, this is your work, and we want to be participants in it. So it's very healthy occurrence. A couple of the observations coming out of this is the number of teams are more than doubled since 2021. And that's very conservative. It could be even higher than that. The fastest growth is with the non-English speakers. Currently, my team are in Ethiopia, launching 4 African teams that are all Africans. Ghana, Ethiopia, and Nigeria, working with unreached people groups that are in that location. 400% growth in face-to-face and conversions. That's super encouraging. The goal is to see converts, and it's not to see activity. And then rapidly maturing initiatives all across the spectrum. Very encouraging. A couple of recommendations is we're going to have to start shifting a lot of our materials from English only, become multilingual, but more importantly, it needs to be multi-ethnic. Westerners, particularly Americans, tend to have a very individualistic, linear point of view, and we need to include in a different type of training structure that's going to be multi-ethnic. One of the things that we need to start developing is a think tank to address funding and structures. The 501c3 or the charitable structures is difficult to put together, and it can take away from our leaders, the visionary leaders of each team. So if we can maybe provide a kind of an overarching umbrella of charitable organization, help give oversight. We don't need to have 400 instances of accountants helping provide financial oversight. We don't need to have 400 instances of doing legal entities and doing tax reporting. Possibly we can develop something else. And then the next thing is post-launch and movement coaching. What does that mean? As we saw earlier, is that we're starting to see 400% increase in number of converts and baptisms. Now many teams are seeing more and more people coming to faith. Now they need to start thinking about how you can put together structures for that's going to lead to church planting movements. And the teams that I've been working with to do this is actually super complicated. So we need to really go deeper into our thinking about movements and church planting movements. And then the last one is expanding our global movement metrics. That's more for the coalition. And that is, we want to understand more of what is going on with these 260 teams. When it was down to 73, we actually had a feel for who was doing what and what their problems were. As you start to get into 260 or 500, we are needing better metric tools to understand what's going on with the greater coalition. So that's the big idea. And so I wanted to now move into questions and answers that you have. What are some of your needs, some of your comments, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Frank. I've heard this a few times now, but it's endlessly interesting to me and really encouraging too. So thanks for the presentation. Anybody can type a question into the chat. We can read it for you. But if you have any questions, you just want to speak up. Why don't you raise your electronic hand, and I'll call on you. Comments or questions. Oh, great. So
I don't see where the electronic hand is.
Oh,
I have a couple of comments. Is that all right?
Go ahead.
I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in Turkey, when we came there, as I said, there were only 50 known believers in a country of 55 million. So the only people who were interested in exploring Christianity were the very fringe people. And you can't really build a church on fringe people because they aren't part of the society. They can't be a person of peace and so on. Well, my comment is that things are different in different environments. The second thing I will say is that one of the major ways that people have come to Christ in Turkey is through a correspondence course, which was originally in newspapers. Now it's online and everything. But that's it kind of proves what you're saying there, that use of media is very important in reaching out to the people.
Yeah, I've been watching the data in both the Hindu context and the Muslim context, and I think what we are seeing from historical gains, which is what you were saying, is that correspondence courses. In the year 2000, there became a real shift in Google, in the Google world, which basically meant it's called use and gratifications model. People began searching out new religious ideas. In the past, we did not have that type of domain. So the virtual and the physical became mashed up. And the people who are coming to faith from the persons of peace idea are people who are coming from the fringe, but they actually move closer into their own groupings. And we're seeing now going from the fringe to the mainstream in a very quick sort of way. I just know from I'm following 35 believers who came to faith in Southeast Asia. And those 35, 2 years ago, they came to faith. Now we have close to 1,500 people who have come to faith out of them. And we've seen about 250 fellowships become started in a very difficult unreached people group in East Asia. In South Asia, And among the Hindu world, we are seeing the same sort of thing. The fringe reaching into their persons of peace population, and it's moving more mainstream. We just had a training last week for leaders, and we actually had to cut it off because we had too many people wanting to be trained to start fellowships. And these were Hindus last year. Now they're wanting to be fellowship. They want to start fellowships. So we're challenged on how you can train leadership, and we're growing. And it's a growing edge. This is where movement's work is going to be critical for our next phase. So it's interesting, your observation, but we have to be we have to be aware that we may be in a new world, new media, new approaches, just because the world is dynamic. So, any other questions?
Thanks, Stephen.
Talking about fringe people, sometimes people who are not on the fringe, we make them fringe by extracting them from their own societies. How does that work out in movements?
Yeah, we're very much keeping them engaged with their population. This is the classic definition of persons of peace. They stay where they are and they aren't extracted. And so there is a concern about the fidelity of biblical teaching, and we're watching that very carefully, but we have not seen that to be a problem. So yes, we're keeping them in place, and it's not like something we are intentionally doing. We're just allowing organic work to occur. And in my article I wrote on the 2.5% principle, we looked at the 12 disciples and from John 1:32 through 52, and those were individuals who were fringe. Peter was probably illiterate. They were all fishermen, yet they grew in their biblical faith, and they became more mainstream to the Christian movement in among the Jews in Jerusalem. So the statement is we have not seen extraction to be part of what's going on in the field.
We have a question in the chat too. Jim wrote, Frank, the growth in recent years is encouraging. Currently 260 teams with continuing growth. What would saturation look like? Is there a total market capacity for M2M initiatives? And so, if so, how many teams would that reflect?
We don't see that there is a saturation, because what happens is leaders emerge, and they are expanding in their own locations. So we have not seen a saturation. I don't know if there would be a saturation. There could be. Media has a limit, but we have not seen that to be a problem right now. And what happens is, because we are an organic, interconnected international group, people start developing their own approaches, and there is some significant variations of what is occurring. Like, for instance, what's going on in Southeast Asia. They've developed their own kind of modus operandi, and it looks a little different than South Asia. And what we're saying is some of our best experts who came out of the work in Southeast Asia are actually going over to South Asia to do training on how to do digital filtering. Africans are rising up, and they're actually training back to other locations. So I just had a meeting in Europe, and they are pulling from people who are from Southeast Asia. So what's happening is the coalition is actually organically sharing information across domains. And so we have not. If we keep it open, keep it flat, then people share freely.
Any other comments?
The number of teams, I don't have any idea. It's growing its own domain. Because success breeds success. And these teams who are now worked for years without seeing much fruit are now seeing significant fruit. And as a result, other teams who are associated with them, other organizations, are saying, well, we can do this too. there's a lot of flexibility in how people are doing their work. Organizations are putting their own domain on it and their own spin, and that's great. That's fine.
All right, what else? Any other questions, comments, responses to what you heard? It's a lot of information. And we did post, I posted in the chat the link to, and I'll give you this a link to the summary as well, but a link to that slide deck, and you can look at some more of the information and kind of process it on your own too, or with your group. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, what we'll do is kind of go around the room and introduce ourselves and see who's here. We have a lot of return people, but maybe not everyone. So I'll just call on your name, and if you would just take about 15 seconds just to say who you are, where you are, and do you have a language or geographic focus in your ministry? And that would be great to just let us know who's here today. And thanks again to Frank for taking time for this presentation. I'll just start. My name is Allison. My husband and I serve with Create International, which is a media ministry. We make evangelistic films for unreached people groups. That's what our particular team does. We are located on the East Coast of the United States, but all of our work is done in the unreached world. So we have a training course that we take around and teach people filmmaking. So lots of work done in India, focus into Africa these days, but Southeast Asia, where the unreached people are. So that's where we go. Paulus.
Yes, my name is Paulus, or Paul, easier for English speaking. I am in a ministry called Create Media School. It's not Create International. Yes, and so what we do, my wife and I, we go around the world and train in media production mainly, but because I'm really exciting how media to movement works, and I experienced the work myself as well. So it's a part of our longer trainings as well. And I'm here to learn, to get input. In the next weeks, I will make a curriculum for my teaching. I taught it before, but I need a real structure. Being a German needs a structure. So that's why I'm a part of this Zoom call as well.
Thanks, Paulus. Hannah.
Hello, I'm Hannah, based in the Philippines. I'm mainly supporting Visual Story Network and MTM, but I also do mobilization in the country and also do content creation, media production, assisting and all that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Hannah. Keegan.
Just as you said my name, my whole camera setup stopped working. Sorry about that. My name's Keegan. Yeah, I'm also with Create International. Yeah, where I'm based in Thailand, although right now I am actually in South Africa. So we also, guess one of our primary roles is managing Campfire. So if you've been on Campfire before, we help run Campfire. So if you're an artist that's working amongst the unreached and you're interested in working alongside other artists, then Campfire is something you should know about.
Thanks, Keegan. Steve.
Now you understand.
What was that?
Steve, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yes, my name is Steve Wimmerly. I'm living in Connecticut now. Spent 35 years working in Turkey. Church planning, that is.
Thanks, Steve. Lainey.
Yes, I'm Lainey and I'm based here in the Philippines, but I work with Media Light Thailand. So we have a media school that we do in Thailand, we also have now online. But our focus now is more of the outreach programs and discipleship. And we use the media production that we do in the Media Light School to reach out to campuses and also disciple the students.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lainey. Let's Sway.
Hi, I'm Sway Caramello. I'm based in Florida. I am on the Jesus Film Digital Solutions team, and I'm the product manager for a new platform we've been building called Next Steps Journey Builder, that will be released later this year. We've been working on that, and yeah, just excited to hear. And I haven't seen Frank in a long time, a few years ago back in Thailand, but yeah, so it's good to hear results of the survey. Thanks.
Thanks, Sway. James.
Thanks. I'm James Scott. I am a coach. So
We're having a little trouble hearing you, James. Can you maybe talk a little
okay.
closer to the microphone?
Yes. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I guess this headset's not working now. Okay. Thanks, Paulus. I'm James Scott. I am Media to Movements coach with the Media to Movements Coalition, and also working with Frontiers. We are trying to help our field teams understand the importance of Media to Movements. So this is a timely presentation. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Allison. There's many things that I think that we'll include in a intro course that we're doing, if that's all right. Some of those slides to motivate, or at least some of the data from the research report to motivate our workers that Media to Movements is something that they should be considering and jumping into in some way.
Thanks. David. David, would you like to unmute and introduce yourself?
Were you asking me?
No, I was speaking to David, but that's okay. We'll come back around. Jim.
All right, okay, I'm hard of hearing, so I thought you said my name.
Oh, sorry. How about Jim?
Oh. Yeah, hi, I'm Jim McGee. I'm based in Colorado, US, spent time previously in Southeast Asia. And I'm working with Calvin Edwards and Company, providing research and analysis for a variety of nonprofits and as well as the donor community. And it's been my pleasure to have a chance to be involved with the Visual Story Network and doing some work on this project, just to do some review of survey design and report draft.
Thanks, Jim. Glad you're here. Glenn.
I'm a layperson. I'm prayer warrior. I guess I've been a prayer supporter for Dave and Jean Coles, and he's the author of Bhojpuri Movement. So that's been my exposure to movements. I've been praying for missions since the 1960s, and I'm really excited about what God is doing, and continuing to pray that God will continue to use and expand these church planting, disciple making movements where the gospel spreads rapidly from household to household and family to family and village to village, and millions of people are being reached, and I'm grateful for what God is doing. So I'm overwhelmed to be among all these people who are actually serving on the field. Thank you all for your ministries.
Thanks, Glenn. Prayer warriors are so important. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. Jill is in a library, so we just say hello, Jill. Welcome you here. And Ken, would you like to introduce yourself?
Ken Smith, located in Philadelphia in an urban ministry, and spent time with Frank in the early days of movements overseas.
Good. Well, great. Thank you so much for everybody being here. So, primarily this group is in place to make connections and, offer each other what we can and support. So if there's anybody you want to reach out to, I would encourage you to take a second here and just exchange some email addresses maybe through the chat. Hannah put in a link to Campfire Creatives, and I added a series of links of things that of pages and different resources that Visual Story Network offers to our Media to Movements top of the funnel group, which is you guys. And we didn't have a lot of people today or a lot of questions, so we're running, below time. So we can just end our meeting unless anyone's got some last minute questions or comments. And I wanted to mention too that you can save the chat by clicking on the 3 little dots that are at the bottom of the chat box, and that gives you an opportunity to save the chat so you can have all those links. Anything anybody wants to close this out with, a comment or a question? Or
so we're not going to do any actual talk about the technical aspects of funneling.
Not today. Today's subject was this survey and the report on the survey.
Okay, so there'll be another seminar for that?
We meet quarterly, and we hear from different people every time on all aspects of the top of the funnel, which is the content creation. And
okay.
Yeah. So if you are now on our mailing list, Steve, so you will get all the information regularly, and hopefully you can join us again for more of our topics.
Good. Thank you very much.
All right, folks. Well, thanks a lot for coming. We'll be sending out the executive summary in about 24 hours with some information on the date for our next meeting. And yeah, I love to see you all. Thanks for taking the time, and I hope you guys all have a good day.
Thank you.